So, thank you. Very nice to be here. Actually, just to share good news. So Predictably Irrational was on the New York Times bestseller for a while now. The paperback is on the New York Times bestseller list. But today I got a call that also The Upside of Irrationality made the list. So next week I'll have 2 books on that. Kind of nice. Okay, so let me tell you a couple of stories about irrationality. And specifically, I call this book The Upside of Irrationality, with the idea that we don't always want to think of irrationality as being bad. In particular, I think there are 2 ways to think about kind of the positive side of irrationality. One is that if we understand what people do wrong, we can actually think about how to fix it. That's the first stuff, right? If we just think people are rational, we'll leave them alone. But if we think they're doing something wrong, we can think about how to fix it. And the second thing is that there might be some cases in which we want to embrace irrationality. That if we could cancel it and redesign human nature, we might not want to do it. And in fact, we might want to get people to keep being irrational. So I'll give you a story about each of those things. So to start with, I want to talk about kind of the negative side of irrationality and how we can fix it. There were 2 sisters in North Carolina that were called the Delaney sisters. And on their 100-year birthday, the youngest one, when she was 100, they had a story with them in the New York Times. And they asked them, what is your secret for your longevity? And they basically said, we have 2 simple answers. The first one is that we decided never to get married. We didn't want the husband to drive us to an early grave. Some of you are nodding with understanding. This is not the topic of the discussion. The second thing they said was that they decided to never go into hospitals. Because when you go into hospitals, you're likely to get more diseases. And it turns out they were correct. And when I was in hospital, I got one of those diseases. I contracted a liver disease from a bad blood transfusion. And it was bad enough to be in hospital in general. It was kind of an added injury to get this liver disease. From time to time, my liver would flare up. It would reject transplants. I would have to delay treatments. Lots of bad things happened. But they also didn't know what was the liver problem I was having. They couldn't analyze it. They couldn't figure out what it was. And about 7 years later, I was in grad school. I had an inflammation. I checked myself into hospital, and they not only started treating me, but they found out what it was. It was hepatitis C, a particular version of hepatitis C. And at that time, there was a new experimental drug that was being tried for hepatitis C called interferon. And they asked me if I want to go on these injections, and of course I did, because who would want to die from liver cirrhosis, right? It sounded like an awful death. So they gave me these injections, and for me, these injections kind of symbolized the human condition, the difficulty of our modern life. And here was the issue. I really didn't want to die from liver cirrhosis, but each one of these injections basically guaranteed to me about 15 miserable hours. Right? So imagine you have this injection, you have to inject into your thigh, and you know that in 1 hour, you'll start experiencing 15 miserable hours. Headache, vomiting, shaking, fever, stuff like that. Nothing compared to dying from liver cirrhosis, but certain and now. And if you think about this trade-off between something unpleasant now and maybe something good in the future, it turns out we often make these mistakes. We often focus on the present and kind of forego the future or dramatically discount the future. So think about it. Dieting, really good for the future, not so much fun now. Exercising, not so exciting now, good for the future. Saving, not fun now, good for the future. Safe sex, not so good now, good for the future. All of those cases are cases where we have this trade-off, and when we have these trade-offs, we often fail. Kind of a standard question we ask is, imagine I asked you for the following choice. I said, would you rather have half a box of chocolate right now or a full box of chocolate in a week? Half a box of chocolate now or a full box of chocolate in a week. And imagine that I actually pass the chocolate around. So it's not just hypothetical, but you could look at the chocolate, you could smell it, you could feel it, and you can get half of the box now or wait another week. Under those conditions, how many people here would wait an extra week for an extra half a box of chocolate? Okay, a few patient people. And I assure you the number would be lower if we actually passed it around. Now imagine we push both choices to the future, and we say, what would you rather have? A half a box of chocolate in a year or a full box of chocolate in a year in a week? How many people now would wait the extra week for an extra half a box of chocolate? I'm guessing everybody. Oh, because in the future, we're incredibly patient. We have no problem. We'll diet, we'll exercise, we'll take our medication on time. In the future, all is well. But the problem is we don't live in the future, we live in the present. So I had these injections, and I gave them to myself 3 times a week for a year and a half, a very long, miserable period. And at the end of it, first of all, the good news that was there was no trace of the disease. The treatment worked. It actually became FDA approved. But the other thing that doctors told me was that I was the only patient they ever had that took the medication on time. Right? I mean, this was a huge FDA protocol. I was the only patient that took the medication on time. And the question is, of course, how could I do it? Do I have nerves of steel? Do I have better self-control than other people? There are a lot of people who know me here and would tell you that that's not the case at all. So what did I do? The answer was that I invented a trick for myself. And my trick was that I love movies. If I had time, I would watch lots and lots of movies. I don't have a lot of time, so I don't watch movies. But every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which were injection days, the way I would spend it is I would walk in the morning, on the way to school, I would go to a video store. I would rent a few movies I really wanted to watch. I would carry them in my backpack the whole day, anticipating watching them. And then when I got home in the evening, I would put the movie in, inject myself, get a bucket, get a blanket. I was all ready for the side effects. And I would start watching the videos immediately. I didn't wait to start feeling sick. I was trying to take something and connect it to this negative thing. Now, if you think about it this way, me and all the other patients should have been sufficiently motivated by wanting to have our liver healthy. Liver important, side effects not so much, movies even less important. But the reality is that because the liver was so much in the future, it was drastically discounted, it was not able to control my behavior. Now, by using these movies, did I really start caring about my liver? No. I substituted it. I cared about something else that was not as big, not as important, not as crucial, but because it was immediate, actually helped me control my behavior. So we call this reward substitution, with the idea that if we can't care about things for the right reasons, maybe we can behave as if we care them for the wrong reasons. And the issue here is that if you understand why people can't care, maybe you can come up with workarounds that would get people to behave as if they care. So let's take another problem. Let's think about global warming for a second. From a psychological perspective, if you wanted to create a problem that people wouldn't care about, right, you would create global warming. That's kind of the ultimate combination. And think about it. It has all the elements to create human apathy. It's long in the future, uncertain, will happen to other people first. We don't see any individual suffering right now. And we don't see any trace of it, and anything we would do personally is a drop in the bucket. Right? All of these forces are the forces that create human apathy, and in global warming, they're all combined together. So can you get people to care? Right? Can you get people to care about something that is so difficult for us to care? You know, maybe a few people, maybe you can get a few people to wake up in the morning with dramatic energy and feeling that today they need to fight global warming. And all of those people are probably in this room. But the reality is that it's going to be incredibly hard, incredibly expensive, and it's unlikely to be successful. So what can you do? Can you use reward substitution? Maybe. So here's an example. Think about the Toyota Prius. When the Toyota Prius came, there was a similar car that was made by Honda, with similar parameters, with similar energy savings, but it didn't look any different. The Honda looked just like any other car. And it wasn't very successful. So what are the people who get Priuses? What do they get out of it? And I'm proposing the following experiment. This is just subjective data. But when I drive around and I see people with Priuses, they look to me like they smile more than other people. Right? Do you say the same thing? And I think for good reasons, right? Because they look at themselves and they say, look at me, I'm driving a Prius, I'm a good person. And not only that, but other people can look at me and see what a wonderful person I am, and that's reinforcing. Now, are these people really waking up every morning and feeling an urgency about the environment, or are they getting some other utility out of the Prius, which is something that complements their ego and help them do something that is good for the environment for other reasons? This is not bad, right? I don't want to say anything bad about Prius drivers. I just want to say that they're doing it for other reasons as well. Now, to look at this, I actually went, people who drive Priuses are very different than people who drive, F-150 trucks, for example. So I went to the group of my friends. And my group of friends are basically homogeneous. They're all kind of very, very similar. And I have some Prius driving friends and some non-Prius driving friends. And I asked my Prius driving friend and my non-Prius driving friend, what else have they done in their homes? What else have they done to reduce energy consumption? What about insulating their attic or change the thermostat? or replacing light bulbs. And it turns out that among my friends, there's no difference between those two populations. The people who are doing it partially because they're good people, but all of my friends are good people, but they're also doing it because it helps their ego. Now, if you think about this as a general solution, this reward substitution, it means that there's lots of problems that we might be able to solve by tacking other incentives on top of that. So let's go back for a second to medical compliance, which we started with. How do you get people to care about medical compliance? So I'll tell you kind of about a combination of multiple studies. Imagine a medication called Coumadin. Coumadin is an anti-stroke medication. It's a relatively good anti-stroke medication. It reduces the chances of a second stroke from about 24% to 4%. Now, under those conditions, you would think that somebody who had a stroke would really take their medication all the time, because who wants a second stroke? Compliance rate is about 60%. And it's really bad because Coumadin is a blood thinner. It was actually invented originally as a rat poison. So it's cheap also. You don't have high R&D costs. And because it's a blood thinner, you want to take it regularly, but people don't. So people don't do it for the right reasons. Can we think about getting to do it for the wrong reasons? So let's think for a second kind of together. What other motivation could you tie to this that would get people to behave as if they care about their health? And the secret, the initial secret, is that we're talking about having an internet-enabled pillbox. So what we have now is a pillbox that every time you take your pill, I know about it. So now with this knowledge, what else can we do to get people to behave as if they care about their health? Let's hear some suggestions. Yeah. Sorry? Social similar. So you could get them reputation. If you take your medication on time, you get reputation. Very good. What else? Chocolates. Okay, something else, right? You can coat the pills with chocolate, or you can give them some other chocolate if they take the medication on time. What else? Money. Money is a simple thing, right? We can pay them. So imagine, for example, that we paid people $3 a day to take their pills on time. What do you think would happen? Will they take it on time? No, it actually backfires slightly. Now, what do you think will happen if we paid people $1,000 a day to take their pill on time? We haven't run this experiment, but we can assume that this will work quite well, right? Sure. Sorry? In the $1,000 condition, not so much in the free one, right? Yeah. Okay, so different forms of money. So this is actually turning out to be a little tricky, because when you give people money now, they get something now. When you discount future cost, it's something about the future, and because people discount, it's actually less effective. So you actually, that turns out to be a bit more tricky. What else? Yeah? Okay, so some donation. And donation, too, you can make in very general ways that people don't care about, or you can make it in very clear ways. So, for example, you can show a picture of a kid in Africa that if you take your medication, they will get food. And if you don't, they don't, right? That could be more motivating. Alma. Sorry, one second. Discount on their health insurance. So it could be something for the future. Again, it's a future reward. We think that, for today, as long as you take it, yeah. So there's an interesting question about giving a reward that is contingent about doing it all the time. So for example, imagine I said, I'm not going to charge you anything for health insurance as long as you take your pill every day. And you miss once, I start charging you for health insurance. That can backfire, because if you miss a drug once, you might say, hey, I might as well, stop doing it and do it. But you can think about some sequential rewards. What else? Nobody mentioned calling your mother? Your kids, getting them to harass you? But let's focus for a second on money, because money is really relatively easy to do. So I said already that if you give people $3, it doesn't seem to help. And we think that if we give people $1,000, it would help. So now the question is, how can you take $3 and make it feel like it's more? Sorry? Take it away. Okay, great. So it turns out there's this principle of loss aversion, which says that people hate losing more than they enjoy gaining, right? And everybody who's looked at their portfolio over the last few years know exactly what this means, right? You open your portfolio, you realize you lost 5%, it's a really miserable day. You see you won 5%, yeah, it's okay. So it turns out that even if we prepay people, we bring people to a 3-month trial, we prepay them $100, and we say every day you don't take your pill, we'll take it back from you, really works very nicely, right? People really hate losing. Now, it turns out that that's not enough. It doesn't really get everybody. And in an experiment by Kevin Volpe and George Lowenstein, they tried 2 other things which were kind of curious. One is that it turns out that people are suckers for lotteries. An economist called lottery a taxation on stupidity. There's actually a beautiful Dilbert in which Dogbert sells discounted lottery tickets. You remember this? And he says, these lottery tickets are only 0.0000001% chance less than the regular one, and they're half price. And Dilbert buys the ticket, and then he said, hey, but this is for last week's lottery. He said, that's exactly the point. So imagine that instead of giving you $3 for sure, I gave you a lottery ticket that was worth 10% chance of making $30. Right? That's already more interesting. Right? Turns out more people take it. But turns out, again, it's not enough. So the nicest version of this experiment was also with the introduction of regret. Now think about regret for a second. Regret is a really interesting emotion because it's about not where we are, but it's about where we could have been. Imagine that you missed your flight by 2 minutes or by 2 hours. When would you be more upset? 2 minutes. Why? You're stuck at O'Hare for the same amount. There's no difference in your physical well-being, but you can imagine you could have made it. In fact, there are multiple ways. You can say, if only I did this, or only I did this, each of one of those things would have got me there on time. Whereas in a 2-hour condition, you have to say, I should have done this and this and this. And it's very hard to think that all of those things would happen. In the previous Olympic, they took pictures of people who won the medals. And they analyzed how big their smile was. Right? And what would you expect? Gold to smile the most, silver and bronze. The gold people did smile the most, but the silver and bronze were reversed. Why? Because what is the silver person thinking? This close. I was this close. Right? Seinfeld had a line that he said, the guy who wins the silver is the first loser. And what is the bronze person thinking? At least I got something, right? At least I'm on this, I'm not in the other group. So it turns out even in this case, our happiness is determined by how easy it is for us to imagine alternative reality. Now let's think about how do we take regret and add it to our lottery experiment. Imagine that all of you are taking Coumadin and the people sitting on my right are taking it on time, and if we did things without regret, I would give you from time to time a lottery ticket and you would win the lottery. But if we try to include regret, I give a lottery ticket to everybody, whether you took your medication or not. And from time to time, I call you up and I say, congratulations, it's your lucky day. You're the winner of the coveted lottery. Bless the stars. Sadly, I see you didn't take your pill today, so you're not getting the money. This is the essence of regret. I could have done something really small that would have made me feel very differently right now. What happens? 97% of the people take the medication on time after this experience. Right? So the point is that if we understand where we fail, like in medical compliance, and we understand how we can overcome it, we can actually build systems that do that. Now, can we get people to really care about their own health? Maybe not, but maybe we could co-opt other things. We can get them to care about money and lotteries, and we can tell them to care about regret, and there's no reason to stop there. And using those things to get people to behave better. And taking Coumadin is good for everybody. It's good for the patient, it's good for the family, it's good for the healthcare system. Everybody wins. So that's kind of the first type of good things about understanding irrationality. The second story I want to tell you is about a story where we really need to think very carefully about whether we want people to be perfectly rational or not. So I want to tell you something about what's called the identifiable victim effect. And the basic story is, you remember baby Jessica who fell to the well and had kind of a miserable couple of days, and her parents, I'm sure, were very miserable. It turns out that she got more CNN coverage than Rwanda and Darfur put together. Right? And we can ask ourselves why. Why does she get so much coverage? And it turns out that that's probably the one topic that Joseph Stalin and Mother Teresa agreed on. Stalin said, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, and Mother Teresa said, if I look at the masses, I will never act. If I look at the one, I will, which is the same principle, that perhaps we care about individuals, but we don't care so much about big tragedies. Right? When something becomes too big, we actually stop caring. We don't care proportional to the size of the tragedy, but as the tragedy becomes bigger, we seem to somehow mute our caring. So imagine an experiment in which I describe to you a little girl called Rukia. I describe to her in depth and how sick she is and how much she doesn't have food and how much your particular donation could help her and so on. And then I say, and how much of your income would you give to this little girl? And people, give a particular amount of money. Or imagine a second condition in which I don't describe Rukia, but I describe the problem of starvation in Malawi in general. And I said there are 2.5 million kids with this condition, and described to you statistically all the problem. It's clearly bigger, clearly more important. Your money could go much further. But what do you think happens? Do people give more money? No, people give much less. They give about half as much. So what happens here when we give people more information and we tap their ability to think rather than ability to feel, people care less. It actually gets worse, because if we take Rukia and we describe her in all her individual glory, and then we say, by the way, she's not alone. There are other people like her. In fact, there are 2.5 million kids like her in Malawi. What happens now? Do we get the benefit of emotion? Plus, we understand, hey, she's not just her. It's more. We should give more? No. We give much less again. We give as if. So what is the point here? The point here is that if you think about what it means to be perfectly rational, it also means to be perfectly selfish. Right? And in fact, when we get people to think rationally, they become more selfish. When we ask people who just finished a class in economics to donate money to charity, they donate much less, because they just had a class that told them that it's good to be selfish. I mean, that's what it is. It's optimal. You just need to follow your particular incentives. But it's kind of interesting to think that in this case, we might not want to be people, for people to be perfectly rational. We actually want them to care. We want them to give. We want them to think about it. But you can say, so maybe we want people to be always perfectly irrational. Maybe we want people to be always emotional, because only when people are emotional, they're doing the right thing. But that's also not correct, because there are some problems that are inherently easier to feel for, and some problems are harder to feel for. For example, prevention. Prevention is very hard to evoke our emotion, because it's about curing something of people who perhaps were not yet born. There's no face. There's no way for those kind of problems to provoke our emotion. So if you look at the range of problems, there are problems that can evoke our emotion naturally very well, and we are easily giving money to those charities, and there are problems that are hard for them to evoke our emotion, and therefore these charities get dramatically underfunded. For example, malaria. I mean, if you look proportionally how much money we gave to Haiti and how much money we're giving to malaria, or how much money we gave to 9/11, or how much money people gave to the parents of baby Jessica, compared to how much money we give to other things, you would come up to the conclusion that trusting our emotion to judge which events we need to support, which kind of charities we need to support, doesn't do a good job. So here's the situation. Emotion gets us to care, but it doesn't get us to care in the right way. Right? So we need some kind of combination between those. We need some emotion to get people to care, and we need some cognition to figure out what we want to care about. The final story I want to tell you about this advantage of being rational is what's called the trust game. I'll tell you about the story about the trust game and revenge. And can I get 2 volunteers, maybe you and Zoe? Okay, stand up. So you don't look at each other. You're strangers, you don't know each other, and here's what we're going to do. Imagine the following game. I give Zoe $20, and I say, Zoe, you can do 2 things with these $20. You can take it and go home, or you can pass these $20 to player B, which is here. We don't give him a name. She doesn't know who it is. If you pass your money to player B, the money will magically quadruple. So by the time player B gets it, it'll be 80. And now player B can do one of 2 things. Player B can take the $80 and go home, or you can send $40 back to Zoe. Now, let's think together. Imagine that all of you were player B, and imagine that all of you were perfectly rational player Bs. What would you do if you end up getting the money? Go home, right? I mean, it's not rational for you to give away $40 to people you walk on the street. You have money, you're selfish, you go home. And knowing that, if Zoe predicted that's what player B would do, what would she do to start with? Not pass the money. So the standard theory says Zoe will never pass the money and player B will never pass the money back. Turns out people are nice in economic theory. That's kind of nice thing for humanity, right? We're nice in economic theory. Often people send the money. Often people reciprocate. But here's where the game becomes more interesting. Imagine that Zoe sent her $20. You got 80. And then you decide to go home with all the money. You can sit down now. You get home. No, Zoe, you're still here. You can sit. Okay, so Zoe sent the $20. Player B got 80, and player B decided to go home with all the money. And now I come to Zoe and I say, Zoe, I'm really sorry you lost this money. But I'll tell you what. If you go into your checking account and you give me some money, I will go and I will hunt player B down for you. In fact, for every dollar you would give me, I will find them and I will take $2 away from them. You'll give me $2, I'll take 4 from them. You'll give me 5, I'll take 10. You'll give me 10, I'll take 20 from them. You'll give me 40, I'll take 80 from them. And now think about it. How many of you would be willing to spend your own money to exert revenge on somebody you've never met and unlikely to meet again? Now, thanks. Now, if you think that you're not willing to do it, it's because you're not really feeling betrayed right now, right? But if you think to a situation that you have been betrayed, I mean, how many, think about people who got divorced once, for example. Think about situation where you felt betrayed, and you can ask yourself, under those conditions, would you be willing to lose a lot of money to make the other party suffer even more? I mean, we see it all the time. Now, it's kind of strange to think about revenge because it's very irrational. Why would Zoe be willing to spend more of her own money to make somebody else suffer? In fact, if you think about it in the right framework, it's incredibly altruistic of her to do it. Can you imagine something more altruistic than punishing somebody you'll never meet again so that in their future interaction with other people, they might actually behave nicer? Right? It's kind of strange to think about it this way, but that's what it means. Now, why do we have this urge for revenge? First of all, it turns out that it's a very natural urge. When Ernst Fehr and some of his friends imaged people's brains while they were executing and plotting revenge, they saw an activation in an area that related to reward and pleasure. Now, why would it be rewarding and pleasurable? Because it's actually very good for society. Revenge is a mechanism that actually helps us coordinate. It's not that Zoe it's good for her. It's good for us together as a whole to have an instinct for revenge. And to think about it, imagine the following. Imagine that you and I lived on a desert island, and imagine I had a mango. And imagine you really wanted my mango. And imagine that for some reason I was not tending to my mango. It was left alone for a little bit of time. And you were considering stealing it. Now imagine in case one, you thought I was perfectly rational. So what you would ask yourself, you would say, if I steal the mango, what will Dan do? And you would say, well, he's far away enough. It's easy for him to get a new mango. I will run far away enough, not be worthwhile for Dan to chase me. And under those conditions, you might decide to steal my mango. But what if you knew I was a revengeful type? What if you knew that I will not sleep and I will not rest? Yeah? It's not a question of cost-benefit analysis. It doesn't matter. You take my mango, I'm going to hunt you down. I'm going to spend day and night, chase you anywhere. I'll find you. I'll take your my mango. I'll take your bananas. I'll do lots of things. Under those conditions, would you at all entertain the possibility even of taking my mango? Very unlikely. Now, if you think about it, trust and revenge are actually two sides of the same coin. Trust is a fantastic thing to have in society. That's the reason you can leave sometimes your house open and car keys, and you can leave your wallet in your drawer and nobody would steal them. And if everybody around you were continuously selfishly maximizing their own benefit, we will have a very different world. And revenge, while seemingly irrational, is actually incredibly useful because it facilitates the ability to trust. So here's an example of two things, trust and revenge, that even though individually they're irrational, in fact, when you think about it, they're quite useful. And I'm not sure at all that we would want to create an environment in which we don't have both of those. I mean, I think we could, perhaps, if we could only have trust and no revenge, maybe we would like that. But given that they go hand in hand, they're quite useful as a mechanism. So this is the second type of benefit of irrationality, of something where the economic theory is wrong. It's not that human beings are wrong and we could fix them. It's a part where actually the description of human being is what's optimal, is not exactly correct, and we need to work on what is this description. Okay, so these are kind of the two things I wanted to talk about. I'll just say one last kind of comment as a summary. You know, there's lots of irrational tendencies. You know, it's very nice because we have a lot of things to study, and our job is guaranteed for many years. And you know, and new rationalities are invented. For example, 10 years ago, none of us would have dreamed about studying texting while driving. Right? But we invent new irrationalities. We invent new ways for us to fail as technology progresses. Now, beyond the particular examples of irrationalities, I think the big lesson is the lesson of how much do we trust our intuition. So I started, when I started writing Predictably Rational, the first example I gave is my experience in hospital, where I said that I was in hospital and the nurses would think about how to remove my bandages, and the question was, should they remove them quickly, rip the bandages off quickly, or remove them slowly? And just think to yourself for a second, if you were consulting your intuition, would you say it will be less painful to remove bandages quickly, short duration but high pain, or slowly, long duration with low pain? Who here would vote for the quick approach? Who would vote for the slow approach? Okay, so most people, the majority of people, this is not perfectly representative. Most people believe in the quick ripping approach, right? And the nurses had an intuition. They had a path that they thought would work best, and they kept on following this path. But that's the danger of intuition. Every day the nurses were faced with this decision, and they decided to follow their intuition. Turns out they were wrong. Turns out it's wrong. I mean, you better off remove bandages slowly. It creates much less pain for the patients. But sometimes we have an intuition that takes us on a particular path, and we need to question it. We need to ask ourselves, are our intuitions correctly? And what do we do to try and educate our intuition? And this is not just about nurses and not just about individuals. It's actually a very general question. Think about the healthcare reform. How many people here have strong opinions about whether having a public option in the healthcare reform bill was a good idea or a bad idea? How many people have a strong opinion? Very good. I mean, everybody has strong opinions about those things. The fact is that those are intuitions. You have no data, right? And it's kind of interesting how we're willing to bet about 80–90% of GDP on intuitions, right? Wouldn't it make sense to admit that the reality is we just don't know that much? And we might as well, you know, Rhode Island is a little state. Let's kind of do some experiments there, give them some healthcare system for a few years, and see what really works, right? And as long as we keep on following our intuition, we have a good chance of following ourselves and just making the same mistakes over and over and over. Okay, so that's basically it for me. I'm happy to take questions, comments, concerns. Happy to talk about other things. Dating, yeah. How do we get people to care? So I'll tell you about one thing we're doing right now, which is kind of this approach of ego. So we are trying to get people in the Middle East to care about water. Well, water is a big problem in the Middle East. It's a barrier for peace in many ways. And the problem with water is private consumption, a bit like energy. You consume at home. It's really nice to have a long bath. It's really nice to wash the dishes with having the water running. It's nice to have a garden and water it. It's really inefficient. So the question is, can we externalize it? So we've created this virtual lake in which each individual can have a drop. And your drop is proportional to how much water you're not spending. So every time you save something, your drop becomes big. And if you think about it, usually when you consume something, you know what you consume, but you don't know what you haven't consumed. So we're trying to visualize what you've saved, right? So this is a virtual representation. And when you walk around this, float around this virtual lake, you can see other people's drops. So you can see how much you've saved. You can compare it to your neighbors, your friends. People can join together. They can create drops for classes, for schools, for neighborhoods. And what we're trying to do right now is to integrate it with Facebook, with the idea that it will update your reputation and so on. So, can we get people to care about water saving? Very, very unlikely. Can we create regulation? The government can. We are not able to do it. But can we tap something else like ego and get people to do it for the wrong reasons but do the right thing? I think so. So I think the same thing we could do with energy. I mean, we can tap ego, we can tap social norms. There's been all kinds of attempts that have been done on this regard, and they're quite useful. The other thing we're trying to do is we're trying now to advise the Department of Energy about how to design the energy label. Think about it. You go to the hardware store, and there's going to be spend 15 minutes deciding which washer and dryer you're going to buy. And this decision is going to have electrical consequences for 10 years. So can we somehow get you to feel the most guilty while in those 15 minutes? Right? I mean, it's one thing to care about, what are you switching lights and so on. That's a long-term decision. But if we can focus our attention on how can a label create the most guilt at that moment and just change your mindset momentarily, we can influence you for a long time. So these are the kind of things that we're trying. Dating. Okay, so I'll tell you a quick story about dating. So this is part of the research with Zoe. Dating is actually an interesting market. How many people here are single? Okay. So it turns out that if you think about it, in every other market, we move from decentralized market to centralized markets. We create financial markets, spot markets, supermarkets, lots of places where we bring buyers and sellers together in some sense. And in the dating market, it's actually been the opposite. Right? We used to have a yente. A yente is a market maker. Used to go around, find out all the details, figure out who would fit with who. Parents used to tell their kids what to do, who to marry. That's, again, kind of a market mechanism. But then all of those dispersed with the idea that love is about romance and finding the right person. You should do it for your own. All of these mechanisms have gone away. And not only that, but the work environment has changed. People move a lot. Most people move to a different city for college and a different city for work, and they keep on switching jobs very frequently. Romance within the job place is not really considered very appropriate, so people have, and they work many hours, so it's really tough, right? If you're single, these days it's really, really tough. So if you think about it, online dating could have been tremendously useful, really important, but the question is, are they functioning in the right way? Are they designed to help us do what we're supposed to be doing? So imagine the following thought experiment. Imagine I ask you to give me a list of 100 people. 50 people you like and 50 people you don't like so much. I'm not talking about the bottom of the pile. I'm just talking about people you don't like that much. And you gave me this list of 100 people, and I went to them and I asked each of them to fill their profile on Match or eHarmony or whatever. And then I came back to you and I gave you these 100 profiles. Without a picture and without a name, I gave you the profile and I asked you to sort them to two piles. A pile that you like and a pile that you don't like. How successful do you think you'll be in this assortment? People are awful. Right? They're awful in this. And the reason is that the way online dating sites describe us is in the same way we describe digital cameras. Pixel and speed and ASA and type of lens. People are not like that. If you took your friends, your dear friend, and asked you what is it about them that make you love them so much, you're going to say, well, it's the combination of their height and their religious preferences. And this is not it. This is not it. People are a little bit more like wine. Right? It turns out when you taste wine, or juice, whatever. I mean, you know if you like it or don't like it. But the act of breaking it into attribute doesn't help you that much. And we actually did an experiment recently. We went to a wine store when a group of Feinschmeckers, the Yiddish expression for people who think they're really connoisseurs. Anyway, they arrived, and we gave them 5 wines, and we asked, please describe each of these wines in details. And people said, oh, it's leafy, and it's this, and it's a tannin, and low acidity. And then we took this description, we gave it to other people and said, try to match it with the wine. No ability whatsoever. Then we gave it back to the people who wrote the descriptions. And they couldn't tell, right? Now, it's because when we taste wine, we actually know if we like it or don't like it, but these descriptions are useless. Right? So what do you do if you understand that this is the problem? Right? The reason we have online dating sites the way they are is because it's easy for computers to search on. Well, these are all measurable things. You can search on it. That's fantastic for computers, not for people. So what we tried to do was to take a step back and to say, what do people do when they go for a date? Do they sit across each other and interview each other? So where do you go to school and what do you do? And no, of course not. In fact, what we do is we go and we experience something together. We go to a restaurant and I see how you interact with other people. Or we go to an art gallery and I see how you react to things. And perhaps by this intermediate, not direct relationship, but by experiencing something together and get you to reflect on it, we actually learn more about each other. So we tried it out. We created a website called virtual dating, in which you got to pick a shape and to pick a color, and you went on this virtual space, and in the space there were all kinds of stuff. There were pictures and images and all kinds of things were going on, and as you got close to one of them, another feature, another avatar could come next to it, and you could start texting with each other. And the texting was no longer like in online dating. By the way, the discussion in online dating are unbelievably boring. It's amazing how boring they are. I'll tell you something about this in a second. The discussions were not about nothing anymore. They were about something. They were about the piece of art or the picture or the image, and how did you think about it, and what does it make you think, and what else do you like? And then we got the people who met other people in online dating sites, regular and online dating sites, and people who met people on virtual dating sites come together and evaluate each other and see who did they want to go with. And our virtual dating site, even though it was simple and trivial and not that sophisticated, did twice as well as the regular online dating site in terms of getting people to actually like each other and go for a second date. Now that for me is actually quite optimistic. I mean, on one hand it says what an awful job people are doing in online dating sites, but it says improvement are actually quite easy. The moment you understand what people can and can't process and how do we actually deal with information and try to integrate it, huge space for improvement. And it's not just in dating, it's lots of stuff. Lots of stuff is described by ways that are easy for computers and not easy for us. What is a $300,000 deductible or $300,000 liability limit on your car insurance? What is it? Good, bad, too much, too little? We have no idea. Companies, they have actuarial data. They can tell you what it is. But the way they describe it to us is something that is comfortable for them but completely useless for us. I'll tell you something else about boring discussion. So we couldn't believe it. I mean, by the way, when we went and got data from online dating, we couldn't believe the discussions. And we thought it can't possibly be that people actually want to have these discussions. But there's a notion of equilibrium in economics, which basically mean that there's actually lots of equilibrium, and the question is what equilibrium people end up choosing. And perhaps what happened is that we really want to have an interesting discussion, but we're uncomfortable, so we kind of reduce the quality, and eventually, we end up talking about the sports or the weather or other boring stuff that we don't really care about. What do you really want to know when you're in online dating? Why did you break up from the previous partner? Any STDs I should know about? Sexual fantasies? I mean, lots of stuff that you really want to know, but very hard to ask about because everybody talks about, where did you go to school and, how many brothers and sisters do you have? So we created a game that didn't allow anybody to ask these stupid questions. You had to choose one of 20 questions, and all the questions were racy. Now, they were moving from little racy to very racy. And because you were forced to ask one of them, it became socially acceptable. Now, people could have just picked the low one and kept on with them, but no. Once you gave people this system, they were very happy to escalate and ask questions they were really happy with. Now, that's again, it's a question of you let people do what they want, what they feel comfortable with, and often it deteriorates to something that nobody's happy with. But if you build a system that actually helps people achieve what they want, you can actually get much more out of it. Yeah, so the two points. One is, we all have examples of people who met in online dating. But of course, we also have examples of people who didn't meet on online dating. And given how many people are actually in online dating is a really miserable outcome ratio. It's not as if you look at the trend and you say, oh my goodness, let me look at the history. The moment online dating introduced, marriage rate has increased in some way, or long-term relationship has increased. That hasn't happened. So it's true, some people meet like this. Here's kind of a really depressing statistics. How many hours of searching and writing people do you think you need to do per coffee? It's about 6 hours. It's 6 hours of online dating for one coffee. And usually it's just one coffee. This is like you had to drive 3 hours with no radio, just in silence, no cell phone, to meet somebody for coffee, and they all just said, that's it. This is a really low exchange rate. Now, the one thing interesting about Friendster is that in online dating, people cheat. In fact, people cheat in interesting ways, and just a little bit, and in a way that they could think about this. Can I talk about your husband? So Shane had the office next to me, and when he was online dating before he met Zoe, and it was a big part of my insight into this world. And when he turned 40, he really questioned where does he fit in the category. he said, do I move to the age category of 40 to 45, or do I stay in the, whatever, 35 to 39? And Shane said, I'm a young 40. It's true. It's true, I'm 40, but when people see me, they see how young I am, not to mention immature. And So he was comfortable kind of going one category down. Would he have been comfortable going two categories down? Of course not. But people are really happy kind of fudging reality a little bit. And what's interesting about how Shane did it, and as well as other people, is that when people do it, they convince themselves that the way that they portray the information is actually more correct. Right? As if Shane is saying, if I put myself in the 40 to 43 category, I'm actually not correct because I don't look like those people. I look more like the young people. It's more accurate description of myself. So it turns out people cheat in lots of these little interesting way in online dating. So this is an interesting question. What happens if you put people in these systems? And we really talk about kind of system in kind of engineering people. And if you think about my interference story, I put myself into this system, right? And you can ask yourself, are there cases in which people would put themselves into this situation? So I'll tell you about one other thing we're trying. It turns out that no man in the history of the world has ever woken up and felt that today is a good day for colonoscopy. So you can imagine this, right? So what do you think men do on the day when they have a colonoscopy schedule? They find other things to do, right? They don't show up. Often they don't show up. So we told a group of men, and we said, what if when we schedule for you a colonoscopy, we will also ask you to write us a check for $500. And if you show up for your colonoscopy on time, you'll get the money back. And if you don't, the money goes to us. About 60% of the people are happy to do it, right? They're happy to do something that they might lose the money because you might wake up that day and actually be sick or actually get in a traffic jam or couldn't do it for real reasons. But there are cases in which people are willing to put themselves into this situation because we know we will fail. So I think there is a class like that where people actually want to play mind game with themselves, like I did with the interferer, and we want to put ourselves in situations that would get us to behave better. Think about something else. Have you ever texted while driving? No, of course not. Imagine that you had a device that you can install that would prevent you from doing that, right? Would you be willing to invest some money in doing it? Turns out people are willing to understand some things and willing to invest money and effort and so on in things that would prevent them from behaving badly. There are other cases in which we ask ourselves where we can manipulate people, in cases where they're not interested, they're not choosing it by themselves. And we haven't looked into this, but I suspect it will still be effective. Knowing that I tried to create regret in you will not really help you not feel regret, right? You can't get this call and say, hey, you just missed the call, and say, oh yes, it was trying to create regret. You could still say, almost. If irrationality is more due to nature or nurture, so I think it's very basic. So let me give the following answer. So in general, the stuff that I do looks very similar. I mean, we don't see gender differences, we don't see cultural differences, we don't see age differences across many things. There's one place in the book where I describe gender differences in something, but it's really kind of unique, and it's because we do very low-level decision making. Every stuff I describe is kind of really basic. Things that become more nurture are actually more complex decisions. So at our level of simplicity, there's no difference. You would have to do something more complex. Now, I'll give you an example for this. So we've been doing lots of studies on cheating, when we tempt people to steal money from us. And the basic paradigm is we give people a sheet of paper, we say we'll pay you $1 per question, but we allow them to tear the sheet of paper so they can tell us how much they solve, and we pay them and they can cheat. But we actually know how much they really solved, and we can figure out how much they cheat. It turns out lots of people are very happy to cheat just a little bit. And the way to understand it is that we try to balance two goals. We try to feel good about ourselves, to look in the mirror and feel we're wonderful, fantastic people, and we also want to benefit from cheating. And it turns out that you could think, how can you do both? Well, it turns out as long as you cheat just a little bit, you could do both. You can still think of yourself as good and benefit from cheating just a little bit. So a question we've been asked a lot is, are there cultural differences? So we tried this. So I grew up in Israel. I tried to check whether the Israelis cheat more than the Americans. Actually, before I tell you this, how many people here grew up in different countries? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people from the people who grew in different countries believe that their countries cheat less than Americans? Canadian? No. Where are you from? Holland. Almost Canadian. So it's kind of interesting, by the way, that the majority of people I've talked to believe that their countries people cheat more than Americans. But anyway, so we checked the Israelis, and I thought that the Israelis would cheat more than Americans. They don't. They cheat just like the Americans. My Italian collaborator was sure that the Italians would cheat more than Americans. They don't. They cheat just the same. My Chinese collaborator was certain the Chinese would cheat more than Americans, cheat just the same. My British collaborator thought, again, in our task, everybody cheats the same, but our tasks have no cultural component. And the way I come to think about it now is that culture helps us take things in and out of the moral domain. Is cheating on your spouse cheating or not cheating? Different cultures have different decisions about this. Is cheating on taxes cheating or not cheating? Different cultures think about it. Cheating on exams. But once you deal with something that everybody agrees is cheating, people are actually quite similar. There is one exception, though, and I'll end with this. And the exception is that we took our cheating task and we went to Washington, D.C. And we went to bars where congressional staffers hang out in, and we checked how much those guys stole money from us. And we went to New York City, and we measured how much bankers stole money from us. So who do you think cheats more, politicians or bankers? Who votes for politicians? Who votes for bankers? Okay, so maybe 3-2. So I have to tell you that my intuition was that politicians would cheat much more. The reality is that bankers cheated 2-1. 2-1. So I was surprised. However, these were congressional staffers, so they were junior politicians. You know, maybe, maybe there's still a chance. Okay, so thank you very much.